Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending this open meeting on the 11th of June, 2025 of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission under the Government in the Sunshine Act. Commissioners Hester Peirce, Caroline Crenshaw, and Mark Ueda are also present. Today, the Commission will vote on extending the compliance date for the most recent amendments to Form PF. Currently, the compliance dates for these amendments is tomorrow, 12 June 2025, but I support extending the compliance date to the 1st of October 2025, which also happens to be the beginning of the federal fiscal year. The initial compliance date for these amendments was March the 12th, 2025. In January, the SEC and the CFTC jointly extended the compliance date to June 12th. Notwithstanding the prior 3-month compliance extension, we have to date received credible commentary that the current timeline simply does not provide private fund advisors with sufficient opportunity to interpret, implement, and test their systems to ensure accurate and consistent reporting. From my own experience with complex technology projects, I sympathize with those points. It is evident to me that additional time is required for dialogue with filers, review of the reasonableness of the data demands, and review of the actual utility of this new information to be collected. The most recent changes to Form PF will necessitate costly upgrades to internal infrastructure of firms, increased coordination across business units, and integration with third-party vendors. These tasks are inherently complex and require extensive testing to ensure accuracy. Rushing this process increases the likelihood of data errors, which defeats the entire stated purpose of this particular form, to enhance systemic risk monitoring. Form PF was first introduced in 2011 and has subsequently been amended 3 times, most recently in February 2024. From an already complex data demand in 2011, each time the form has been amended, it has required advisors to provide additional information and ever more granular data. As a result, even without the most recent amendments, Form PF imposes significant compliance burdens on the private fund industry. The complexity of the form, in addition to the ever-evolving nature of its demands, has required advisors to seek costly legal and compliance support to complete it accurately. These costs divert resources away from advisors' core investment functions. Therefore, in addition to our action today, I've directed the staff to undertake a comprehensive review of Form PF. I have serious concerns whether the government's use of this data justifies the massive burdens that it imposes. We should work hard to keep our information requests to a minimum, requesting only what is needed and no more. As the saying goes, let's measure twice and cut once. While this important work is being done, private fund advisors will continue to provide a wealth of information on the prior version of Form PF. So I'd like to thank the staff of the Securities and Exchange Commission and the CFTC for their agility in responding to these concerns. Now I'll turn the meeting over to Natasha Greiner, Director of the Division of Investment Management, for the staff's recommendation. So Natasha.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Atkins, Commissioners Peirce, Crenshaw, and Ueda. The Division of Investment Management recommends further extending the compliance date for amendments to Form PF that the SEC and the Commodity and Futures Trading Commission jointly adopted on February 8th, 2024. Specifically, we recommend extending the compliance date for these amendments to October 1st, 2025. While the Commission has jointly with the CFTC extended this compliance period in the past, our engagement with the industry has underlined that more time is needed for private fund advisors to comply. We understand that these advisors are carefully and diligently working to coordinate with their service providers to ensure that the data reported is accurate and consistent, but they need more time. I want to thank our colleagues at the CFTC as well as our team at the SEC, including those from the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis, the Office of General Counsel, and the Division of Investment Management for nimbly responding to these concerns. I will now turn it to Oliver Richard from the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis, who will explain the economic effects of this recommendation.
Good afternoon, Chairman Atkins and Commissioners. Today, the Commission is considering adopting the extension of the compliance date for the Final Form PF. The Final Form PF requires private fund advisors to provide enhanced information to the Commission. The extension under consideration today would grant a further compliance date extension to October 1st, 2025. We expect that this extension would benefit affected advisors by allowing them enough time to address remaining significant challenges. This in turn would reduce potential operational inefficiencies that could arise as a result of new reporting systems not being sufficiently tested and troubleshot. The cost of extending the compliance date are related to the Commission receiving the new information on the Final Form PF later. The extension would delay the realization of the economic benefits from the new information on Final Form PF. For example, to the extent that there are significant market events during the extension period, extending the compliance date may result in foregone benefits from the Commission not receiving data from Final Form PF. In closing, I want to thank my colleagues in the Division of Investment Management and the Office of the General Counsel, with whom we've worked closely during the development of this extension. And I apologize for my video maybe not showing up. Nothing to do with me.
Well, thank you very much. So let me ask the commissioners if they have any remarks or questions. And so starting with Commissioner Peirce.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Natasha and Oliver. I support extending the compliance date for the amendments to October 1, 2025. Extending the compliance date until then will give filers and their third-party service providers additional time to develop and test their reporting systems. As the request letter noted, private fund advisors subject to the rule need additional time to build and test the new reporting systems and work through any outstanding reporting and interpretive questions with the goal of providing uniform data to the commissions. The extension reflects a commitment to good governance and common sense implementation. My concerns about Form PF and its recent expansions persist. We should reassess whether the information the form collects aligns with the intended purpose of the form. As I noted in my dissent to the adoption of the amendments we're extending today, unbridled curiosity rather than a legitimate regulatory objective shapes the demands of Form PF. Overly extensive reporting requirements not only are costly and invasive, but erroneously suggest that the government's role with respect to private funds is akin to its role supervising banks, which have a government backstop. I support the chairman's directive to review Form PF to determine whether it serves its intended systemic risk mitigation purpose. I want to thank the Commission staff and the Divisions of Investment Management, Economic and Risk Analysis, and the Office of General Counsel for their quick work in drafting the extension release. And in closing, just a quick word of thanks to Natasha Greiner, whose departure was announced this week, and she's served the Commission so well for almost a quarter of a century, culminating with her role, which here as Director of the Division of Investment Management. So I want to thank you, Natasha, and wish you the best as you leave the agency. Your willingness to pitch in and help wherever you could will continue to serve as a model for the rest of us. You will be missed. I don't have any questions.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Peirce. Commissioner Crenshaw.
Thanks. And I do have some questions, so I'm going to actually start with those. So perhaps Jeff Fennell from OGC is where I'm hoping to begin. So if Jeff, if you're on.
I am.
Great. So I'm curious, is it our view that an amendment to the compliance date of a rule requires a commission vote under the APA?
Yes, this is the first step we're undertaking here for an extension of the compliance date.
Okay. Have there been other rules where we've extended the compliance date less than 24 hours beforehand in this manner?
I apologize. I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. Within 24 hours or not.
Is it common?
Not to my knowledge within 24 hours.
Okay.
No, but again, I don't really have that information. And I'm
Okay.
happy to go back and try and do some survey. I know that that's not helpful for you here at the open meeting, but
No, I appreciate that. I think to the degree industry sort of really needs and wants this extension, they certainly have a long runway to let us know, and they usually have, in my experience. We seem to believe that the CFTC will vote today, but if there were not to be a parallel vote of the CFTC today, what is our view of the legal status of this compliance date?
so as I began to answer before, this is the first step because this is a joint rule. So the SEC vote here today will be the first step, and the CFTC will further have to vote to extend the compliance date. Based on our coordination with the CFTC, we expect that to occur after today's vote by the commission. And
Okay.
this kind of staggered approval of an extension or any amendment to a joint rulemaking is not unusual. They definitely have to happen or most likely happen in succession.
Sure, in succession, but so we believe that they will have to vote on this.
Yes.
Okay. If they don't, does it go into effect as written and adopted by both commissions over a year ago?
The compliance date absent joint action will remain the same. It will
Okay.
require joint action to change the compliance date.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that's helpful. Okay, thanks, Jeff. I'm going to actually switch to IM now. Appreciate your answers.
Sure.
I guess, Natasha, as your farewell parting OCM, I do have a couple of questions, perhaps for you if you're on.
Yes, I'm on, and Sarah Tensidov is also on and able to answer any questions.
Great, thanks. Is it the division's view that filers have not had sufficient time to prepare for this compliance date with over 1 year of notice, several months extension already?
Yes, I think as we had previously extended, we continue to have ongoing discussions with the industry about concerns they have as it relates to preparation to file. More recently, in the last month, we've had more engagement as we've come closer to the June 12th date, that they need additional time. And based on discussions with those market participants and industry groups, we feel like it's appropriate to extend.
Have they given us specific examples?
Yes, they've talked a little bit about some third-party vendor issues, outstanding interpretive questions, and the like that give them some concern about preparedness, especially as it relates to how it might affect the data quality if they started filing based on the June 12th date. So additional time will help them resolve some of those preparedness questions, but also, I think, improve the quality of the data going forward.
So what are the third-party vendor concerns, if we have any examples of those?
Sarah, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, Commissioner, I can say that a large portion of the filers use third-party administrators and others for the filings. And so they need to coordinate with those third-party vendors to make sure that their systems are integrated with the FINRA filing system, have the accurate and complete information in there, and are ready to transmit it. So it's that integration for filing through those vendors.
Okay. Has FINRA, the organization that manages the form, have they expressed any concern about tomorrow's compliance date, as some have suggested?
No, we've had discussions with FINRA over the last week, and they don't have any concerns. There has been an open testing environment since late last year and continued updates along the way based on the testing environment, and they've had completeness checks so they were prepared. So it's less about FINRA and more about filer preparedness.
Okay, I know the compliance date's tomorrow, but when do we expect the first filings to actually be made?
So Commissioner, I could say that if under the current compliance date, filings, I think the most of them would come in. There's a quarter that would end at the end of this month for large quarterly filers, and those filings are due for large hedge fund advisors within 60 days after quarter end. And so there may be some that come earlier, but the vast majority of those typically come near the end of that 60-day period, so in late August.
Okay, thanks. So they still have 80 days roughly, give or take, before they actually, for most of them, actually need to file anything.
So when it's due, although some do file earlier.
Yeah, okay. Does the division believe that the information required by the new form is important to understanding systemic risk from certain private funds?
Yeah, yes, the answer is it is important, and the commission adopted those amendments, but we are as the chairman had said in his statement, we do want to take a look to see what data is being requested as in the entirety of Form PF, to see which data is being used and what is useful to the commission to ensure that we're intaking the data that is actually necessary for our supervisory purposes.
Okay, and just to be, did our FSOC colleagues also support the amendments as adopted and see the value in this improved data?
Commissioner, we did communicate with our colleagues at FSOC about this extension.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, and I appreciate that dialogue. So with that, today's open meeting looks like a straightforward commission vote to extend a compliance date for a recently adopted rulemaking. But there's certainly more here than meets the eye. The reality of our action today is more complex and more concerning. And the clock is ticking because, as you've all heard, the compliance date at issue is, in fact, tomorrow. Form PF is the confidential form on which certain SEC-registered investment advisors to private funds report information to the SEC that helps us to understand potential systemic risk. The SEC and other regulators, including FSOC, depend on these detailed data to better comprehend when the private markets may be experiencing turbulence that could affect our entire financial system. Because these entities generally operate outside of our regulatory purview, these data are our best and perhaps our only way to spot large-scale financial disasters originating in the private funds market, or amplified by private fund exposure, before these events happen. And these data can help us understand more fully the impact of a market event if it has already occurred. The recent amendments and the new version of the form would improve the quality of these data so that they are more precise and helpful for identifying and responding to systemic risk. Remember, many of our pension fund dollars are invested in private funds. So understanding risks in this market is important for American retirement savings. Today, the Commission is attempting to extend the new form's compliance date under the wire, just hours to spare, to accommodate a last-minute request from some of the most highly sophisticated, highly resourced entities in our financial system, who have already been given an extension several months ago. Now they're back for more time, with really doesn't seem like much of a credible reason. The truth is that we're here to extend this compliance date not because firms actually need additional time to comply, but to allow for reconsideration of these amendments more broadly. If you look closely, you find the proof in footnote 12 of today's release. That footnote admits that the Commission is delaying the form's compliance date so it can revisit, or perhaps endeavor to abandon, this information altogether. So although this extension is for just a few more months, I suspect we will continue to accommodate requests to extend this compliance date until we have significantly revised or undone this rule. And so with this vote, we plow ahead and do exactly that. We're simply disregarding the authority of two previous commissions at both the SEC and the CFTC who adopted this new form just 1 year ago. And while I posit that entities in such a situation should abide by regulations lawfully adopted and thus file a new form, this procedural quagmire is certainly a far cry from what the APA intends. Much has been said about the Commission's desire to return to a reasoned agency process, but this desire is nowhere to be found when there's a looming compliance date that some would like to dodge. Finally, it's also important to remember that this timing also just so happens to be aligned with a powerful policy push to increasingly open private markets to retail investors. By preventing these amendments from coming online, we are willfully blindfolding the Commission and similarly hobbling our and other financial regulators' ability to conduct more precise and effective analysis of private markets. This further undermines our ability to do data-driven rulemaking in the future, including our ability to effectively do an economic analysis for this or any future commission, should it try to open private markets to retail investors. And the timing couldn't be worse, as evidenced by increasingly widespread concern about the stability of private markets. Refusing to receive these improved data on systemic risk doesn't make those risks go away, and we can't have it both ways. We can't suggest that it's perfectly safe and appropriate for investors of all stripes to gain exposure to these markets while we're going out of our way to put our head in the sand about what's actually going on in those same markets. Of course, if this commission wants to revisit Form PF and reconsider any part of the form, it can, but it must do so as part of the rulemaking process and in proper coordination with the CFTC, not by forcing through an 11th hour compliance date extension under false pretenses. Thank you to the staff and the Division of Investment Management, particularly Natasha, who Commissioner Peirce noted is leaving us after a very, very long, dedicated career at the agency. Natasha, you will be missed. Thank you also to the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis and the Office of the General Counsel for their work on this release. I'm particularly grateful to many of those on the team who also worked on the final amendments last year. I do hope that one day the Commission will actually experience the benefits of your work and the important data from those PF amendments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Crenshaw. Commissioner Ueda.
Well, thank you, Chairman Atkins, and thank you to the staffs of both the SEC and the CFTC for your work on today's recommendation. But before I turn my comments, I did want to talk a little bit about you, Natasha. So in light of the news yesterday, I want to thank you for all of your service to the Commission, both in part of enforcement, exams, trading in markets, and finally, investment management. You are somebody who has given so much to this agency, and I want to thank you particularly for your leadership, stepping up to be co-director of exams when Rich Best had to take a leave of absence. During your time as the director of investment management, when I was the acting chairman, I want to thank you for all of the things that you helped implement, including the extension of the compliance date of Form and Port, including moving forward on co-investment applications, as well as for issuing staff guidance on the implementation of the marketing rule. You've also done so many things to start reconsideration, whether they are things that culminated in the registration of foreign advisors from Switzerland to engaging in very, very meaningful discussions on where we are on ETF share class. So thank you. I'm going to miss seeing you around the building. Now, with respect to today's action here, today's extension gives affected persons additional time to comply with the requirements associated with the new amendments to Form PF. I appreciate the comment letters that have expressed concerns with the technical aspects of complying with revised Form PF that have helped inform this extension. In addition to giving time to market participants and the commissions to address these technical concerns, the delay gives flexibility to address other unforeseen issues with respect to revised Form PF. This approach will mitigate the potential for an outcome where uncertainty, confusion, and ambiguity in technical requirements results in firms spending significant amounts of money to file reports with data that is useless, inconsistent, and not of any value to the SEC or other government agencies that rely on such reports. Today's action is necessary to address significant shortcomings with the 2024 amendments to Form PF. That rulemaking ran afoul of what good rulemaking looks like, in that it failed to answer a fundamental question. Do the economic and information benefits yield results that are commensurate with the compliance burdens to the firms? When the burdens outweigh the benefits, such as where the provisions are both costly and likely ineffective, well, that represents the worst possible rulemaking outcome. For example, commenters expressed concern about disaggregating each component fund of a master feeder arrangement and parallel fund structure. One commenter explained that disaggregated information would be misleading and difficult to analyze, and that it would not be the type of information that the commissions likely would be able to readily and accurately reaggregate. The commission's response was simply to disagree, that the information would be misleading. Now, as firms have tried to implement what the commissions required, the technical shortcomings of these and other requirements have become far more apparent. In moving forward, it is important to balance the sensitivity of the data included in Form PF with any corresponding benefits. The costs associated with this data are significant, both in terms of compliance costs and demands on firm personnel. So I want to thank you to the SEC staff in the Division of Investment Management, the Division of Economic and Risk Analysis, and the Office of General Counsel, and the many others in our agency, as well as a thank you to our colleagues over at the Commodity Futures Trading Commission for your work on this matter to date. So I have a few questions here. First, I guess I'd like to just follow up with Sarah Tensidov on, you said that all of the other members of the Financial Stability Oversight Commission Council agencies have been advised that we're doing this extension. Did any one of those agencies object to the extension of this Form PF?
No, Commissioner, we did not receive any objections.
All right. No, well, thank you. Appreciate that. And then, I'll just have a comment, I guess not so much a question, but, part of when I look at our mandate, we collect a lot of this information that was required by Dodd-Frank at the behest of other agencies, including the Office of Financial Research. There was an election. There was a new administration. We should be providing data that they're going to use. While we do use some of the Form PF information, which we have been for a number of years, this new information, one of the most important questions to ask of the folks who use this at Treasury, OFR, or the FSOC is whether or not what is their belief on this. And Director Natasha Greiner, I know you made the point about the commission determined that information was important back when we adopted this in 2024. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And that was after discussion of those who were in charge of the various FSOC council members and OFR at that time. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
None of the current leadership of any of the FSOC member agencies or the current political leadership over at the Treasury Department in the Trump administration had any input into that in their official capacities, right back in 2024.
That would be my understanding.
Well, yeah, and I respect that they might have been in private capacities, but certainly not in official capacity here on that. And so I think when we look at this and we think about the value, we need to ask a very important question. What do the current people who are the very intended beneficiaries of this information want to know? And for that, we have not heard any types of concerns about this. Now, with respect to this compliance stage, is Bryant Morse on the call?
Yes, Bryant and Elise Brunfeld are also on the call.
All right, so I want to talk about another rule that we did, proxy voting advisory businesses. So that was adopted in the last year under Chairman Jay Clayton and the rest of his commission. There was a compliance date for early 2021. Did the commission vote to extend the compliance date of that rule?
I know we revisited the rule, Commissioner. I'm sorry, just off the top of my head, I can't remember if we extended the compliance date or just revisited the rule.
Well, I recall that there was a no action letter that was issued under the instruction of the chairman, the then chairman. I don't recall if it was the acting chairman Lee or if it was Chairman Gensler, but basically said this rule, the compliance date has gone into effect, but we are not going to take any enforcement action on this. Is that correct?
That is correct, Commissioner.
Yeah, and I'm going to presume that the Office of the General Counsel signed off on that approach. I know some people might have had concerns about that, but that no action position would not have been issued without the acquiescence of the General Counsel's office. That was within the remit of the authority of the chairman and the commission, right?
Yes, Commissioner.
Okay. So with respect to any procedural requirements, the fact that this is the commission doing it, I think goes far beyond what the prior administration did. And again, apologies, I can't recall if that was acting Chair Lee or if it was Chair Gensler who issued that by fiat. But I think what Chairman Atkins has done here by scheduling this for a commission action, it's exactly the return to normalcy and rule of law for this commission. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing this up to a commission vote, and I thank the staff for all of their efforts to work with us as well as our counterparts at the CFTC. I have no further questions.
Oh, well, thank you, Commissioner Ueda. Yeah, I wanted to actually follow up with the staff on a few things here with our procedure. But first, I wanted to say that this Form PF is not just some little old form. It's quite a massive document. The questions and instructions are 93 pages in length, and the commission itself kind of had a very fast type of proposal process back in August and following of 2022 with only 6 days of comment and, for a 200-page release. And then that was at the same time that the commission was also putting out a number of other very complex rules that many of which were asked of private fund advisors to respond to and to put into effect. So that to me was rather a rushed rulemaking process, and now we're kind of reaping the fallout from that with yet more changes that were initiated back last year, and where I think people rightly have raised some questions about some of the aspects of these forms that are in demand. Like, so for example, I'll just cite 3 questions on the form. And so that's question 41 basically asks that, it says here, quote, "You must net the reporting fund's exposure with each counterparty and among affiliated entities of a counterparty to the extent such exposures may be contractually or legally set off or netted across those entities, and or one affiliate guarantees or may otherwise be obligated to satisfy the obligations of another under the agreements governing the transactions," unquote. So that's a mouthful, obviously, and it's basically a prescriptive requirement to net among counterparty affiliates whether contractual or legal set-off is available. So that's quite a granular aspect. But then following question 41 are questions 42 and 43, and here, quote, "You may not treat affiliated counterparty entities as a single group, except that if applicable contractual and legal documentation requires cross-margining, report the legal entity identifier of the contractual counterparty, typically the prime broker," unquote. So this is no mention of netting, and it's unclear in my reading of it whether the concept of netting would even be treated, as part of, as germane to that or not. So that's just one example of some of the, to use a colloquial term, gobbledygook that's in this that people have to sort out, where I think people have justifiable questions to the staff. And so I just wanted to ask really quickly for Natasha or Sarah, as far as these particular items go. Have we are these new sorts of demands for information from counterparties, or is this kind of a cleanup from the old ones? And if so, how would what do you think the ease of necessarily figuring this out would be from some of the 3,000 some odd advisors who are 4,000, I guess it is, who are filing these?
I'm happy to answer that, Chairman. These were new instructions on how to treat netting and counterparty exposure. And so they did introduce additional analysis that firms would need to go through and added complexity.
Right. So anyway, so I mean, so things like this, I know, this may be a bit unusual at the last minute, but again, my view, if we're going to ask people to spend time and effort, and then plus they have to come to us to, try to straighten it out. And, I feel bad because for you all and the staff that the initial kind of rollout of some of these things might not have been it was curtailed, I think, more than, might have been otherwise. I think, from my perspective, again, I view it as a necessary or basically really desirable to provide that people time so that we get good data that has integrity if we, purport to use it. And, one thing that I know is true with respect to FSOC is at least my counterparts on that body are in agreement that non-bank financial institutions don't pose systemic risk to our markets, and that with proper supervision of other market participants, and especially among the banks who are lending to some of these institutions, that we can cabin in systemic risk that way. And what I would love to see during this time in the future now, during the time that we're hopefully extending this, is to be able to collect more data, to collect more commentary, and to make it so that this form actually provides utility to us, so that maybe increasing the integrity of that data. So, and then I wanted to say as well, lest there be any doubt, because obviously the CFTC is a co-party with us on this rule, but similar to what's happened in the past, I will direct the SEC enforcement staff not to enforce the filing of the new form, which I view as being not in effect post our actions today. And I will direct that FINRA as well, as our contractual, which is the contracted entity that collects this data as a repository, to retain the current Form PF on its website, so that we don't have any gaps in provision of data in the meantime. So, and I wanted to also say to Natasha, thank you. I join my colleagues in thanking you very much for your service to the commission over more than 2 decades. And you started when you were in kindergarten, maybe, I think. But anyway, but I wanted to really voice my appreciation and all best wishes for you, in your future endeavors. So with that, are there any other comments or questions from the commissioners? Nope. Okay, so let me ask the commissioners how you all vote on the recommendation from the staff regarding Form PF. Commissioner Peirce,
Yes.
Commissioner Crenshaw,
No.
Commissioner Ueda,
Yes.
and I vote yes as well. So we've adopted this recommendation and the amendments to the rules. And with that, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you all very much for your time.